Biology Chapter 7, Cells. We're getting straight into this. Chromatin, like 52 card pick-em-up, is kind of just jumbled up information, whereas chromosomes on the bottom have perfect X shapes, and they're extremely organized. With that out of the way, let's get started with organelles. Now you might be asking yourself, what the heck are organelles? Well, all living things are made of cells, and in cells are organelles. The first organelle we're going to talk about is the nucleus. The nucleus acts as a brain for the cell, although cells don't actually have brains. Now, if you also look at this picture, you might also be able to see a thing called the endoplasmic reticulum. Now, don't let the long word worry you. Just remember it as a long assembly line. And the way it works is it just builds things, essentially. Seeing this picture, you can also see things called ribosomes. Simply put ribosomes as modifying. They simply modify things inside the cell. Another organelle you can find inside only plant cells is called a chloroplast. Simply think of it as a solar panel, as it uses photosynthesis to turn light into energy. Now, in lots of cells, you can find a mitochondria. This turns carbs into energy. Now, you can also find an organelle called a vacuole inside most cells. Mostly seen larger in plant cells, but also in all of the cells, it simply just stores liquids for later use. You can also find another organelle called a lysosome. A lysosome simply acts as a grinder or teeth or a paper shredder, where it simply breaks down things that enter the cell. Finally, we have the Golgi apparatus. Simply think of it as FedEx, where inside the cell, it uses microtubules to transport things from one place to another. Now that you know the 8 organelles inside a cell and the basic way that it works, we can go a little bit more in depth about how a cell functions. We can start off with the cell membrane, acting as a thin, stretchy layer that protects the insides of the cell and prevents anything going inside the cell. Now, if you zoom in further, you can find the lipid bilayer. This is what makes up the cell membrane. Now, if you zoom in further, you can also find protein channels, which just simply acts like doors, letting whatever the cell wants inside and whatever it wants to keep out, out. Next, we can go over concentration. Simply think of it as how much of something you put in. So say you have a cup of Kool-Aid on the left with barely any of the powder inside of it. And then on the right, you have a ton of the Kool-Aid powder in it. That is concentration. The difference between how much of the powder you put in per each cup. Next, we can go over diffusion. Think of diffusion simply from going from a high concentration to a low concentration. Now let me simplify that for you. Imagine taking the Kool-Aid example and going from the super powdered one to the one with no powder. Need a better example? Imagine taking 2 balloons, one with a ton of water in it and one with barely any water in it. What would happen if you were to just connect the two? Obviously, the large one would sink into the little one until they reach equilibrium. Next up is selective permeability. Simply think of it as you get to choose what goes in and what stays out. You get to choose where it goes. Simply think of it as choosing what goes in and what comes out. Alright, so tell me if you have or haven't done this. Facilitated diffusion. Yes, you have. Everyone has done it. It's literally just the act of using a stupid door. If you know what that is, then you know what facilitated diffusion is. Osmosis is just simply water ghosts. Yes, there are ghosts inside our bodies. There's nothing you can do about it. They literally make you live. If you have something to say about it, tell your cells to stop working. Anyway, water osmosis, or just osmosis, is just the act of water without using facilitated diffusion, or the act of using a door. So simply, water just walks through the cells. And that's it. Now we come to active transport. Yes, that's my cat in the background. Anyways, active transport simply, unlike diffusion, goes from a low concentration to a high concentration. It is not natural. It requires energy to do so. Whereas diffusion does not take energy. It is natural. It does it by itself. Lastly, we can start with endocytosis, exocytosis, and phagocytosis. Endocytosis is where simply the cell eats something that doesn't fit inside the cell normally. So it reshapes itself so that it can fit that thing inside of it. Exocytosis is simply the act of releasing something that doesn't fit in the cell. And then finally, phagocytosis is the same thing as endocytosis, but on a huge level. Now that's a lot to handle because it's a lot of large words. So simply, endocytosis, Pac-Man style. Something doesn't fit through the door, eat it. Exocytosis, get something out of you that's too large. And phagocytosis, get something massive outside of you.